The air on the 60th floor of Sterling Tower didn't just feel cold. It felt expensive and lethal, like the edge of a diamond-encrusted guillotine. In Manhattan, they say money doesn't sleep, but here, in the inner sanctum of Nate Sterling, money didn't just stay awake, it watched you with predatory intent. I stood in the break room, my fingers trembling as I clutched a porcelain cup that probably cost more than my first car. My scent blockers were working overtime, but I could still feel the phantom itch of my own jasmine pheromones trying to leak out of my pores, a physical manifestation of the sheer terror thrumming through my veins. "Don't screw this up, Oliver," I whispered to myself, my voice barely a ghost of a sound. "It's just coffee. 1 cup of coffee. You survived the orphanage. You survived Mr. Henderson's umbrella-wielding tantrums at your last job. You can do this." But my past, my glorious, trauma-riddled past, had a funny way of making every alpha in a tailored suit look like a monster under the bed. And Nate Sterling wasn't just an alpha. He was an enigma, a dynamic so rare it felt like an urban legend, designed to keep omegas like me in a perpetual state of submission. Then, it happened. The $20,000 Italian-imported espresso machine, the crown jewel of the executive floor, gave a sickly, metallic clink. A puff of gray smoke hissed from its vents, followed by a silence so absolute it felt like the building had lost its heartbeat. I stared at the blinking red light on the panel. It wasn't just broken. It was dead. The clock on the wall ticked, 9:02 a.m. Nate Sterling expected his caffeine at 9:05 a.m. Panic, hot and jagged, sliced through my chest. I looked at the dead machine, then at the pantry. There, tucked behind a jar of artisanal honey, was a dusty, forgotten tin of instant coffee, generic, cheap, the kind of brown dust that tasted like burnt cardboard and regret. I didn't have a choice. It was either serve the mud or face the enigma empty-handed. 3 minutes later, I was walking down the hallway, the lethal brew balanced precariously on a silver tray. Every step felt like a march toward my own execution. I reached the massive mahogany doors of the CEO's office. I took a shuddering breath, adjusted my glasses, and knocked. "Enter." The voice was a low, vibrating growl that seemed to bypass my ears and rattle my ribcage. I pushed the doors open. Nate Sterling was framed against the floor-to-ceiling windows, the New York skyline looking like a toy set beneath his feet. He was a mountain of charcoal wool and raw power. His scent hit me before he even turned around, the overwhelming, suffocating aroma of crushed cedarwood and dark, approaching rain. It was an apex predator's scent, one that demanded I drop to my knees and bare my neck. I didn't. I forced my legs to move, my heels clicking rhythmically against the polished marble. I placed the cup on his desk with a hand that I prayed looked steadier than it felt. "Your coffee, Mr. Sterling," I managed to say. My voice was a thin wire, stretched to the breaking point. Nate didn't look up immediately. He was staring at his monitor, his jawline so sharp it could have cut glass. Finally, his storm gray eyes drifted toward the cup. He reached out his long, calloused fingers wrapping around the porcelain. The contrast between his large hand and the delicate cup made my stomach twist in a way that was definitely not professional. He took a sip. I watched his throat move as he swallowed. For a heartbeat, the world stopped. I waited for the explosion. I waited for him to hurl the cup through the window. I waited for him to realize I was a fraud who didn't belong in this temple of excellence. Nate went rigid. His eyes widened, just for a fraction of a second. A muscle jumped in his cheek. He slowly set the cup down and turned his head toward me. Suddenly, he began to type furiously on his keyboard. Click, click, clack. I stood there frozen. Was he drafting my termination papers? Was he calling security? Then, Nate Sterling did something far more terrifying. He stopped typing, turned his body fully toward me, and looked me dead in the eye, slowly, agonizingly. His lips peeled back into what I assumed was supposed to be a smile. But because his face was so tight with what I perceived as suppressed rage, it didn't look like a smile. It looked like a snarl. It looked like a slasher movie villain, realizing he'd found his next victim. His teeth were white, his eyes cold and unblinking. It was the slasher smile of my nightmares. "Interesting flavor haze," he said. His voice was a rasping vibration that made the hair on my arms stand up. "Thank you for the effort." The scent of cedarwood intensified, becoming sharp and acidic, the smell of a storm about to break. My Omega instinct screamed, "Run. He is marking you for death." You're welcome, sir," I stammered, already backing away toward the door. I didn't wait for a dismissal. I turned on my heel and bolted out of the office, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I didn't stop until I reached the executive bathroom. I dove into the furthest stall, slammed the lock, and slid down the door until I was sitting on the cold tile. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold my phone. I pulled it out and opened my messages with my best friend Jasper. "Oliver, Jasper, it's over. I'm dead." "Jasper, what? Did you spill juice on his suit?" "Oliver, no. I fed him the dirt water from the pantry." He smiled at me. "Jasper, He gave me the "I'm going to dissolve your body in acid" smile. "Oliver, if I don't text you in an hour, the password to my savings account is 609. Tell my landlord to give my cat to someone who doesn't work in Wall Street." I leaned my head against the door, closing my eyes. I could still smell him, that dark, magnetic cedarwood scent. It was clinging to my clothes, marking me. In the office next door, Nate Sterling wasn't thinking about acid. He was staring at his screen, his heart racing, his hands clammy. He had just opened a hidden Excel file titled Social Dynamics V3, XLSX. He scrolled down to tab Situation 14B, Subpar Hospitality Beverages. Response Strategy: maintain eye contact to show dominance tempered with mercy. Smile to encourage the subordinate. Do not show weakness. Nate let out a long, ragged breath, his fingers hovering over the keys. Did I look friendly? He wondered, his mind a whirlpool of social anxiety. I think I looked friendly. Or maybe I looked like I was having a stroke. God, he's so small and he smells like jasmine. And I think I just terrified him into a different dimension. He looked at the murky, gray coffee in the cup and took another brave, miserable sip. The war had officially begun. The second day at Sterling Tower began with a very specific, very expensive purchase, a level IIIA concealed ballistic vest. It was thin enough to fit under my crisp white dress shirt, but thick enough to make me look like I'd put on 10 pounds of pure anxiety overnight. It was stiff, it was hot, and it chafed against my collarbone, but as I stepped onto the elevator, I felt a marginal sense of security. If Nate Sterling decided to launch a fountain pen at my jugular for yesterday's instant coffee debacle, at least my vital organs had a fighting chance. I had a new strategy: aggressive invisibility. I didn't walk down the center of the hallways anymore. I hugged the walls, my shoulder nearly brushing the expensive textured wallpaper, moving with the silent, frantic grace of a startled gecko. I calculated the exact blind spots of the security cameras. I memorized the patrol routes of the janitorial staff. I was a ghost in a 60-story machine. By 10:30 a.m., I was in the break room, cautiously refilling a water carafe. I kept one eye on the door and the other on the hallway reflection in the stainless steel fridge. You look like you're waiting for a SWAT team to breach the ceiling haze. I nearly jumped out of my Kevlar. I spun around to find Carter, the head of security, leaning against the doorframe. He was a beta with a permanent smirk and eyes that seemed to find everything in this building, including my impending demise hilarious. "Just alert, Carter. New York is a dangerous city," I stammered, pulling my shirt tight to hide the telltale bulge of the vest. Carter walked over, grabbed a granola bar, and looked me up and down. "It's not the city you're worried about. It's the boss." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Word of advice. S letter 1 EBFP. He's never looked at anyone the way he looked at you yesterday." That smile, I've seen him look at a failing hedge fund with more warmth. My blood turned to ice. He has. "Oh yeah," Carter patted my shoulder, his touch lingering just long enough to feel the stiffness of my vest. He raised an eyebrow, but didn't say anything about the armor. "He's been staring at the security feed of your desk for 20 minutes. Most people would call that stalking. In this building, we call it executive interest. Good luck, kid. You're gonna need it." He left with a wink, leaving me paralyzed. He was watching me right now. I bolted out of the break room, intent on reaching my desk and burying my head in a spreadsheet. I took the long way, weaving through the maze of cubicles in the accounting department. I was nearly there, nearly safe, when the air pressure in the hallway suddenly plummeted. The scent hit me first: cedarwood, dark rain, an approaching thunderstorm that promised to level everything in its path. Nate Sterling was standing at the end of the corridor. He wasn't moving. He was just there. His charcoal suit absorbed the light, making him look like a shadow that had gained physical mass. I froze against the wall, my heart hammering so hard against the ballistic vest, I thought it might crack the plates. "Don't look at him. If you don't look at him, he can't see you." I lowered my head and tried to shuffle past. My back practically fused to the wallpaper. I was 5 feet away when the shadow moved. Nate didn't just step toward me, he intercepted me. In one smooth, terrifyingly fast motion, he closed the distance. Before I could even gasp, his large hand slammed against the wall right next to my ear. Thud. I was trapped. The enigma towered over me, his massive frame blocking out the overhead lights, casting me in total darkness. The smell of him was everywhere. It was in my lungs, on my skin, vibrating through the very fibers of my soul. It was a scent of absolute power, of a predator who had finally cornered his prey. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for the impact. This is it. This is where he dissolves the body. "Hayes," his voice growled. It was deeper than yesterday, a low-frequency vibration that made my knees wobble. I forced my eyes open. He was hovering inches from my face. His storm gray eyes were blown wide, dark pupils swallowing the iris. He looked intense, manic, like he was trying to calculate the exact trajectory of my fear. You are avoiding me," he stated. I have a lot of filing. Mr. Sterling, efficiency. I'm being efficient, I squeaked, my voice an octave higher than usual. Nate didn't move his hand. Instead, he leaned in closer. I could feel the heat radiating from his chest. He was so close, I could see the faint silver flecks in his eyes. He stayed there, hovering in my personal space, his gaze darting between my eyes and my throat. He was doing it. He was doing the predator stalk. He was asserting his dominance before the final strike. "You smell," Nate started, his voice cracking slightly. He cleared his throat, his jaw clenching so hard I heard the bone pop. "You smell like jasmine, it's distracting." He stared at me for another 10 seconds of pure, unadulterated psychological torture. Then, without another word, he pushed off the wall and walked away, his stride long and purposeful, leaving a vacuum of freezing air in his wake. I slumped against the wall, sliding down until my butt hit the carpet. I was hyperventilating. He had smelled me. He had cornered me. He was distracted by my scent, which in alpha speak meant he was losing his patience with his prey. Inside the CEO's office, Nate Sterling slammed his door shut and collapsed into his leather chair. His hands were shaking so violently, he had to sit on them. He opened his laptop. His breath was coming in short, ragged bursts. Social Dynamics V3. XLSX tab, Tactics C3, creating intimacy through physical proximity. Strategy, if the subordinate seems distant, close the physical gap. Use a power lean to show you are a protective presence. Mention a neutral observation about their scent to establish a sensory bond. Do not let them leave until the bond is acknowledged. I almost died. Nate whispered to the empty room, his face turning a bright, frantic red. I leaned on the wall and I forgot how to breathe. Did I growl? I think I growled. Why did I growl? He looked like he was about to faint. Or call the police, or both. He looked at the security feed. Oliver was still sitting on the floor in the hall, looking like a broken bird. Nate put his head on his desk. Tactics C3 is a failure. Move to Strategy D1, Extreme Observation. He didn't realize that in the hall, Oliver Hayes was currently Googling how to file a restraining order against a billionaire without getting murdered. The dance was no longer just a dance. It was a war of nerves, and we were both losing. New York City was being swallowed. A record-breaking blizzard had descended upon Manhattan, turning the vibrant neon veins of the city into a frozen, white graveyard. 60 floors up, the wind didn't just howl. It screamed against the reinforced glass of Sterling Tower, sounding like a pack of wolves mourning a lost kill. The atmosphere inside the office was even worse. For the past 4 hours, the scent of cedarwood and dark rain had transformed. It wasn't just distracting anymore. It was sharp, jagged, and smelled like ozone before a lightning strike. It was the scent of an alpha who had moved past irritation and straight into a cold, calculated bloodlust. Or at least, that's what my survival instincts told me. I sat at my desk, my fingers flying across the keyboard as I drafted what I was certain would be my final work task. A comprehensive inventory of the CEO's private archives. My ballistic vest felt like a lead weight against my chest, and my throat was so dry, it felt like I'd swallowed a handful of Wall Street gravel. Suddenly, the heavy mahogany doors to Nate's office creaked open. I didn't look up. I practiced my don't notice me and maybe I'll live posture, rounding my shoulders and making myself as small as possible. But the air pressure shifted. Nate wasn't just standing there. He was radiating a level of distress so potent it made my eyes water. Then I heard it. A voice from inside his office, amplified by a speakerphone. It was a voice that sounded like grinding stones and ancient, cold entitlement. "You are a sterling, Nate. Stop acting like a sentimental beta. The board doesn't care about your innovative leadership. They care about strength. If you show even a sliver of weakness at tomorrow's meeting, I will personally ensure you are stripped of everything. Do you understand?" "I understand, Father," Nate replied. His voice was flat, hollowed out of any emotion. The line clicked dead. I held my breath, staring at a typo on my screen for 10 straight seconds. Richard Sterling, the patriarch, the man who made billionaire sharks look like goldfish. If Nate was under that kind of pressure, he was going to need a scapegoat, and I was the only person within striking distance. Nate walked toward my desk. Each footfall sounded like a drumbeat in a horror movie. I finally looked up, my pulse a frantic, erratic mess. He looked terrible. His charcoal tie was loosened, his hair was disheveled, and his eyes were bloodshot. But it was his jaw that terrified me. It was clamped shut so hard I thought he might shatter his own teeth. "Hayes," he rasped. "Yes, Mr. Sterling," I squeaked, my hand instinctively creeping toward the drawer where I'd hidden my typed-out will. "The storm. It's worse than the forecasts predicted. The roads are closed. The subways are flooded at the lower levels." He leaned over my desk, his shadow completely swallowing me. "Nobody is leaving this building tonight." My heart did a somersault and landed in my stomach. Trapped. I was trapped in a 60-story fortress with a cornered, high-pressure enigma who was being threatened by his own father. I can sleep in the break room, sir. I have a very comfortable sweater." "I won't be a bother," I blurted out, already imagining him using me for target practice in the middle of the night. Nate stared at me. His pupils were so blown out they looked like black holes. He reached out, his hand hovering near my shoulder. I flinched, my ballistic vest crinkling loudly. He froze, his hand dropping back to his side as if he'd been burned. "You'll stay in the executive suite," he commanded. "It has a guest room. I need you close, in case the board members send any late-night inquiries." Close. He wanted his prey within arm's reach. "Efficiency," I whispered, trying to convince myself. "Right. Close for inquiries. Very professional." Nate didn't respond. He turned on his heel and retreated into his office, slamming the door. Inside, Nate Sterling collapsed against the wood of his door, his lungs burning. He was trembling so hard he had to grip the handle to stay upright. His father's voice was still echoing in his head, a whip-crack of expectations that he felt he was failing every single second. He stumbled to his desk and pulled his laptop close, the screen's glow the only thing keeping the darkness at bay. Social Dynamics V3, XLSX tab, Strategy D1, Extreme Observation and Crisis Management. Manual entry, when under external threat, the Alpha must secure his territory. Keep the mate, Hayes, in the immediate vicinity. Do not allow him to leave. Use a commanding tone to hide the internal collapse. If he looks scared, it means you are successfully projecting strength. Nate let out a broken, wheezing sob that he quickly muffled with his hand. "He looks terrified," Nate whispered to his Excel sheet. "He's shaking every time I speak. That means the K-1ECBCH, B-1EA3N is working. I'm being a Sterling. I'm being strong. He thinks I'm a leader." He scrolled down to the emergency protocols. His father had programmed these into his brain, and this file years ago. Strength is silence. Power is distance. Nate looked at the camera feed of the outer office. Oliver was currently putting on his coat, his movements jerky and panicked. "He smells like jasmine and fear," Nate murmured, his heart aching with a physical pain he couldn't code into a spreadsheet. "I just want to tell him I'm scared. I just want to ask him if he's okay." He looked at the next line in the Excel file. "Do not show vulnerability. Vulnerability is the death of the Sterling name." Nate gritted his teeth, his expression hardening back into the cold, untouchable mask of the enigma. Outside, the lights flickered. The wind screamed again, and I, Oliver Hayes, realized that I had officially run out of ways to survive the night. The executive guest suite was larger than my entire apartment, furnished in sleek grays and minimalist chrome that made it feel less like a bedroom and more like a high-end holding cell. I sat rigidly on the edge of the king-sized mattress, still wearing my shoes, my tie, and of course, my level IIIA ballistic vest. Outside, the blizzard had reached a screaming crescendo. The heavy glass windows shuddered under the force of the wind. I stared at the door connecting my room to the main executive office, listening. For an hour, there had been nothing but the faint, frantic clicking of a keyboard from Nate Sterling's office. I imagined him typing up the exact coordinates of where he planned to bury me. Then, the universe decided that my anxiety levels weren't quite high enough. With a loud, metallic clang that echoed through the ventilation shafts, the power died. The lights didn't just flicker, they were extinguished instantly. The low, constant hum of the building's HVAC system stopped. The silence that followed was absolute, heavy, and terrifying. I waited for the emergency backup generators to kick in. 10 seconds passed. 30 seconds, a minute. Nothing. The grid was completely fried. I was plunged into pitch-black darkness, trapped 60 floors in the air with an enigma who had been pushed to the absolute edge of his sanity by his billionaire father. And then, the scent hit me. It crept under the crack of the adjoining door, a tsunami of crushed cedarwood ozone and pure, unrestrained wildness. It was no longer the controlled, dominating scent of a Wall Street CEO. It was the chaotic, explosive pheromone release of a predator who had just lost its chain. My Omega instincts violently hijacked my brain. He's hunting. The lights are out, and the hunt has begun. Crash. The sound of shattering glass and splintering, wood exploded from Nate's office. My heart stopped. He was destroying the furniture. He was losing his mind. I scrambled off the bed, my hands blindly patting the darkness, until I found the small kitchenette counter. My fingers closed around the only weapon I had, a cold, half-empty mug of the instant coffee I had nervously made an hour ago, hoping to use it as a peace offering. The adjoining door slammed open. It hit the wall so hard the plaster probably cracked. "Hayes," a voice wheezed from the doorway. It wasn't a growl. It was a jagged, desperate gasp, like a dying engine. But in my panic-addled brain, it sounded like the raspy hiss of a demon emerging from the shadows. "Stay back," I shrieked, backing myself into the furthest corner of the room. My back hit the cold glass of the window. I held the ceramic mug in front of me like a holy relic. "I have coffee. It's generic, but it has caffeine. Don't come any closer." Heavy, erratic footsteps stumbled into the room. Nate was moving blindly, his massive frame a darker void against the blackness of the suite. I heard him collide with a leather armchair. He let out a choked, guttural sound, dropping heavily to his knees right in the center of the room. The cedarwood scent was so thick now, I could taste it on my tongue. It was suffocating. He was preparing to lunge. I could feel it. This was the end. "Please," I yelled, squeezing my eyes shut, the mug trembling violently in my hands. "I'm sorry I ruined the espresso machine. I swear I'll learn how to use it. I'll take a barista course. I'll roast the beans myself. Just please don't kill me, Mr. Sterling." The room fell dead silent, save for the howling wind outside and the sound of my own hyperventilation. "Kills you." The voice that echoed from the floor didn't belong to a ruthless corporate titan. It didn't belong to a bloodthirsty enigma. It sounded small. It sounded incredibly, painfully fragile. I opened my eyes, straining to see through the oppressive darkness. My laptop, Nate choked out, the sound accompanied by a harsh, rattling gasp for air. It died. The battery, it died. "Your laptop," I stammered, entirely thrown off script. Why does the serial killer care about his laptop right now? "The file," Nate gasped, his voice cracking violently. I heard the rustle of his expensive suit as he curled inward on the carpet. "It's gone." The power surge. "No internet, no backup, I don't have the script." "Script? What script? Are you reciting a monologue before you murder me?" I cried out, my back pressing so hard against the glass, I thought it might shatter. "I'm not going to murder you, Oliver," Nate practically sobbed. The sheer desperation in his use of my first name struck me like a physical blow. He took another shuddering, agonizing breath, fighting a losing battle against a full-blown panic attack. "I don't know how to talk to you. I don't know how to look at you, kill you, Oliver. I don't even know how to ask if you've eaten lunch without that damn spreadsheet." My brain completely short-circuited. I lowered the mug of cold coffee. The terrifying, murderous pheromones clogging the air suddenly rearranged themselves in my mind. The harsh cedarwood wasn't a threat. The jagged ozone wasn't a warning of an attack. It was the scent of absolute, unadulterated panic. The most feared enigma on Wall Street wasn't hunting me. He was having a severe, debilitating anxiety attack on my floor because his Excel cheat sheet had crashed. "Lay, a spreadsheet," I whispered into the dark, the absurdity of the situation finally piercing through my trauma-induced terror. "Social Dynamics V3, Nate confessed into the carpet, his voice muffled and thick with shame. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm terrifying. I know I'm terrifying. My father said. He said if I just followed the cells. If I just smiled." "You call that a smile?" I blurted out, before I could stop myself. "You looked like you were plotting to harvest my organs." A pathetic, whimpering sound escaped the giant alpha. The spreadsheet said it was a dominance tempered with mercy smile. I stood frozen in the pitch-black room. The terrifying, monolithic image of Nate Sterling shattered into a million pieces, leaving behind a terrified, socially paralyzed man who was currently gasping for air on a luxury rug. And suddenly, I wasn't afraid anymore. The ceramic mug slipped from my fingers, landing on the thick plush carpet with a dull, anticlimactic thud. Cold, generic coffee soaked into the expensive fibers, but I couldn't bring myself to care. A few feet away in the pitch-black void, Nate let out a horrible, wheezing gasp. It was the sound of lungs desperately trying to pull in oxygen and failing. I heard the frantic slap of his hands against the floorboards, followed by a heavy thump as his shoulder hit the coffee table. "My inhaler," he choked out, the words barely intelligible. "Dropped it, can't breathe." Every survival instinct I had honed over the past 5 years screamed at me to stay glued to the wall. My old boss used to break things when he was angry. He used to corner me, letting his alpha pheromones choke the air until I submitted. The darkness was an alpha's domain. Going near a cornered, panicking enigma was practically suicide. But this wasn't an abusive alpha. This was Nate Sterling, a man who had built a 60-story empire of terror, entirely out of color-coded cells in a Microsoft Excel file. I took a deep breath, fighting the violent trembling in my hands. "Don't move, Mr. Sterling. I'm coming to you." I dropped to my hands and knees. I pulled out my phone from my slacks, my thumb frantically swiping to activate the flashlight. The harsh lead beam cut through the blackness, casting long, eerie shadows across the suite. The circle of light swept over the overturned leather chair, the shattered remains of a decorative vase, and finally Nate. The sight made my breath catch in my throat. The untouchable enigma, the terror of Wall Street, was curled in on himself, his knees pulled to his chest. His expensive charcoal suit jacket was bunched up, his tie yanked loose, as if he had tried to rip it off to get air. He was trembling so violently that his teeth were chattering. I crawled closer, the beam of my phone illuminating a small, silver canister about 3 feet away from his grasping hand. The inhaler. I snatched it up and scrambled to his side. The sheer mass of him up close was intimidating even now. The cedarwood scent was still thick, but it smelled burnt and chaotic, entirely consumed by his distress. "Mr. Sterling," I said, keeping my voice as steady as possible. I didn't whisper, whispering implied fear. I spoke with the firm, level tone of a 911 dispatcher. "I have it. I need you to sit up slightly." He flinched when I spoke, his storm gray eyes squeezing shut. He was locked in a severe sensory overload. I hesitated. To touch an enigma without permission was a firing offense in the corporate world. In my world, it was just terrifying. But he was suffocating. I reached out my hand, looking ridiculously small against the broad expanse of his chest. Pressed flat over his pounding heart, he gasped, his entire body jerking at the sudden contact. "Nate," I said, dropping his title entirely. "Look at me." His eyes flew open. They were wild feral and flooded with a very human terror. I pressed the inhaler into his large, trembling hand, guiding his fingers around it. "Take a breath on 3, 1, 2, 3. He pressed the canister, inhaling sharply. He coughed a harsh, tearing sound, but the medicine began to work its way into his lungs. Again, I instructed, my hand still resting on his chest. I could feel the erratic, terrifying speed of his heartbeat against my palm. He took another puff. His breathing was still far too shallow, his panic a living, breathing entity in the room. He was looking at me, but his eyes were unfocused, trapped in whatever nightmare his father had conditioned into him. He needed an anchor. He needed something stronger than his fear. I closed my eyes. For years, I had taken suppressants to hide my dynamic. I had worn scent blockers like armor, terrified of what an alpha would do if they smelled the sweet, vulnerable jasmine of my true nature. But right now, I needed to be an omega, not as prey, but as a sanctuary. I stopped fighting my biology. I let the mental walls drop. Instantly, the heavy, suffocating scent of ozone and burnt cedarwood was pierced by a wave of pure, concentrated jasmine. It wasn't the weak, diluted scent of a frightened omega. It was thick, soothing, and overwhelmingly warm, a biological blanket meant to pacify and heal. Nate's reaction was instantaneous. The moment the jasmine hit his senses, his pupils contracted, the panicked energy began draining from his tense muscles. His chest rose and fell in a long, shuddering exhale. Slowly, hesitantly, he leaned into the touch of my hand. His large fingers, the ones that had gripped the inhaler, moved to weakly wrap around my wrist. He didn't pull or demand. He just held on, treating my wrist like a lifeline, holding him above a dark, drowning sea. We sat there in the pool of the flashlight's glow. The blizzard raged outside, beating against the glass, but inside the suite, the storm had finally broken. "Oliver," he breathed, his voice barely a rasp. He was looking at me now, truly looking at me, stripped of his Excel sheet, stripped of the Sterling legacy. "I'm here," I whispered back. Click. With a mechanical hum, the building's emergency generators finally kicked in. The overhead lights snapped on with blinding brilliance. I blinked against the sudden glare. The harsh light banished the intimacy of the shadows, revealing the absolute absurdity of the scene. I was kneeling on the floor of a multi-million-dollar suite, holding the hand of a billionaire who was clutching an asthma inhaler like a teddy bear. Nate blinked, his storm gray eyes adjusting to the light. He looked down at my hand on his chest, then his gaze drifted lower, focusing on my torso where my dress shirt was pulled tight. The thick, unmistakable outline of my Kevlar vest was painfully obvious. A long, heavy silence stretched between us. The Enigma mask was gone, but the awkwardness of a man who didn't know how to socialize without a spreadsheet returned in full force. "Are you?" Nate started, his voice rough. He cleared his throat, a faint, deeply embarrassed blush creeping up his neck. "Are you wearing body armor?" I slowly withdrew my hand, feeling the heat rise in my own cheeks. It was either that or write a really compelling obituary. I muttered. For the first time since I met him, the terrifying CEO of Sterling Tower didn't consult a mental spreadsheet. He just looked at me, looked at my tactical vest, and let out a sound that I could only describe as a genuine, exhausted laugh. The morning sun reflected off the snow-covered streets of Manhattan, turning the city into a blinding, frozen wasteland. But inside the boardroom on the 60th floor of Sterling Tower, the temperature felt even colder. I stood in the corner of the room, clutching a crystal water pitcher like it was a shield. For the first time in 3 days, I wasn't wearing my level IIIA ballistic vest. I had left it in the guest suite. After holding a billionaire while he had an asthma attack in the dark, the illusion of Nate Sterling as a bloodthirsty predator had evaporated completely. Unfortunately, the real predators were currently sitting around the massive mahogany table. The board of directors looked like a pack of wolves in bespoke Italian suits. And sitting at the opposite end of the table from Nate was the alpha wolf himself, Richard Sterling. He possessed the same storm gray eyes as his son, but there was no panic in them, no hesitation, only a calculating, ruthless ambition. The blizzard knocked out the internal servers. An IT technician stammered, sweating profusely as he backed out of the room. "No presentations, no cloud access. We are entirely offline, sir." My stomach plummeted. I looked over at Nate. He was sitting at the head of the table, perfectly still, too still. His laptop, the holy grail containing Social Dynamics V3, XLSX, was effectively a $3,000 paperweight. Richard leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "A minor inconvenience," he said, his voice a booming baritone that demanded submission. A true Sterling does not rely on visual aids to command a room. "Let's discuss the hostile takeover of the Vanguard Group. Rumor has it, Nate, that you've been hesitating, showing mercy." The word mercy hung in the air like a curse. The other board members shifted, their eyes locking onto Nate like vultures waiting for a carcass to drop. Nate didn't respond immediately. I could see the muscles in his jaw ticking frantically. His hands were clasped so tightly on the table that his knuckles were stark white. He was trying to access a mental spreadsheet that had been wiped clean by a power outage. Smile to show dominance. I could practically hear his brain screaming. Maintain eye contact. Use a power phrase. But without the script, the enigma was paralyzing. The air pressure in the room began to drop. The heavy scent of cedarwood started to spike, but to my trained nose, it wasn't the scent of an alpha preparing to strike. It was the scent of burnt wood and rising panic. He was suffocating again, right in front of the people who wanted to destroy him. "Well," Richard prompted, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. "Have you lost your voice, son? Or have you simply lost your nerve?" "He needs an anchor." I didn't think. I just moved. I stepped away from the wall, the crystal pitcher heavy in my grip, and walked briskly toward the head of the table. Every alpha in the room ignored me. I was just a beta-presenting secretary, a ghost in the machine. I stopped right behind Nate's chair. I leaned forward to pour water into his empty glass. As I did, I let my left hand drop, pressing my knuckles firmly against the heavy mahogany back of his chair, right between his shoulder blades, a solid, grounding physical contact. At the exact same moment, I focused on my breathing. I deliberately dropped the mental wall I had spent years building. I didn't unleash a tsunami of scent that would alert the board and humiliate him. Instead, I released a single, concentrated thread of pure jasmine pheromones, aiming it directly at the space between us. Nate inhaled sharply. His rigid posture broke. The violent trembling in his shoulders completely vanished. He leaned back slightly, pressing his spine against the spot where my knuckles were anchored to the chair. It was a microscopic movement, invisible to the boardroom, but to me, it was a profound surrender. He was drawing strength from the terrified Omega he had accidentally kidnapped the night before. Nate let out a slow, controlled breath. When he opened his eyes, the feral panic was gone. The storm gray was clear sharp and terrifyingly lucid. He didn't try to summon the fake, slasher movie smile from his spreadsheet. He didn't try to deepen his voice into an unnatural growl. He just spoke as Nate. "I haven't hesitated, Richard," Nate said. His real voice was slightly raspy, lacking the theatrical boom of traditional alphas, but it possessed a quiet, razor-sharp intelligence that cut through the room like a scalpel. "I paused the acquisition because Vanguard is bleeding capital from an undisclosed offshore liability. A liability that your outdated analytics team completely missed." Richard's smug expression faltered. "That's impossible, our data." "Your data is from a week ago," Nate interrupted, his tone completely flat, completely conversational, and utterly devastating. "I cross-referenced their shell companies. If we acquired them on Friday, we would have absorbed a $400 million toxic debt. I didn't show mercy. I let them hang themselves." Silence, absolute, deafening silence descended upon the boardroom. The board members exchanged shocked, panicked glances. Richard Sterling's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. He had expected a robotic, predictable alpha whom he could easily manipulate. Instead, he got a genius who had just saved the company from a catastrophic failure, entirely off the cuff. Nate leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. He didn't look like a programmed enigma anymore. He looked comfortable. "Now," Nate continued, looking around the room with a calm, genuine authority. "Unless anyone else wants to question my methods, I suggest we move on to the Q3 restructuring. And we'll do it without the projector. Try to keep up." I stood behind him, my heart swelling with a pride so fierce it almost brought tears to my eyes. He had done it. He had faced his greatest fear without a script, and he had absolutely crushed it. As the board members scrambled to open their physical portfolios, Nate subtly tilted his head back. He didn't look at me, but I saw the corner of his lips twitch upward into a small, genuine smirk. It wasn't a dominance tempered with mercy smile. It was just Nate, saying thank you, and it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. The aftermath of the board meeting felt like the silence after a massive explosion. Not the destructive kind, but the kind that clears the air of old, stagnant smog. The wolves had retreated. Richard Sterling had vanished into his limousine with a face like thunder, and Thop Sterling was still standing. More importantly, Nate was still standing. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window in the CEO's office, watching the sun dip behind the Manhattan skyline, painting the clouds in bruised purples and defiant golds. The scent of jasmine was soft now, a gentle hum rather than a desperate shield. "Oliver," I turned. Nate was sitting behind his desk, but for the first time, he didn't look like a mountain of charcoal wool and corporate coldness. His tie was draped over the back of his chair, his top buttons were undone, and his sleeves were rolled up. He looked human, exhausted, brilliant, and entirely human. "Yes, Mr. Sterling." He winced slightly at the title. "Come here, please." I walked over, my footsteps silent on the marble. As I reached the desk, he turned his monitor toward me. It was a blank desktop, save for one single icon, a green Excel logo titled Social Dynamics V3, XLSX. Nate looked at the screen, then up at me. His storm gray eyes were soft, the liquid silver I had seen in the darkness of the guest suite. "My father spent 15 years building this file," Nate said, his voice a low, steady baritone. He told me that without it, I was a defect, that an enigma who couldn't command a room through fear was a Sterling who shouldn't exist. I believed him. I believed that every interaction had to be a calculation, a battle to be won. He reached out, his long fingers hovering over the keyboard. But yesterday, in the dark, and today, in that boardroom, I didn't have the script. He looked at my hand, the one that had anchored him to the chair. I had you. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't winning a battle. I was just living. Nate highlighted the file. He pressed Shift plus Delete. "Are you sure you want to permanently delete this file?" the prompt asked. Nate didn't hesitate. He clicked yes. The icon vanished. A decade of artificial control, of dominance tempered with mercy smiles and programmed growls, was erased in a single click. Nate let out a long, shuddering breath, his shoulders dropping, as if a physical weight had been lifted from his spine. "Now," he said, looking at me with a small, shy smile that didn't look like a slasher movie villain at all. "I have no idea what I'm supposed to say next. There is no cell in a spreadsheet for this." I felt a laugh bubble up in my chest, warm and light. Well, usually, in this part of the movie, the boss asks his secretary if he wants to get dinner. But since we're trapped in a building by a foot of snow, I think we have to settle for the break room. Nate stood up. He walked around the desk, stopping just inches from me. The scent of cedarwood and dark rain was there, but it was grounded, protective, and unmistakably safe. He reached out, his hand trembling just a fraction as he cupped my jaw. "Oliver," he whispered, "I don't know how to do this perfectly. I'm going to say the wrong things. I'm going to be awkward. I might even accidentally growl when I'm just trying to say I like your hair." I leaned into his palm, closing my eyes for a second. "I'm wearing a ballistic vest to work, Nate. I think we're both a little defective by Sterling standards, but I like our version of perfect better." He leaned down, pressing his forehead against mine. "Me too." 10 minutes later, we were in the executive break room. The $20,000 espresso machine was still very much dead, sitting there like a shiny, useless monument to corporate excess. "Allow me," I said, with a mock-serious bow. I pulled out the tin of generic instant coffee, the Lethal Brew. I measured the brown dust into 2 cups, added hot water, and stirred until it was a murky, unappealing gray. I handed one to the most powerful enigma in New York. Nate took the cup, staring at the swirling mud inside. He looked at me, then took a brave, deep gulp. His entire face contorted. His eyebrows shot up, and he let out a choked sound that was half cough, half gasp. He looked like he had just swallowed liquid charcoal mixed with battery acid. "It's," Nate started, his eyes watering. He cleared his throat, trying to maintain his dignity. "It's an acquired taste." "It's terrible, Nate," I laughed, taking a sip of my own and grimacing. "It's objectively the worst coffee in the Northern Hemisphere." Nate looked at the cup, then at me. He didn't consult a spreadsheet. He didn't look for a K letter 1 ECBCH, B letter 1 EA3N. He just leaned over the break room counter and kissed me. It tasted like burnt cardboard, generic caffeine, and absolute, unfiltered happiness. His lips were warm and soft, his hands finding my waist and pulling me flush against him. I wrapped my arms around his neck, my fingers tangling in the dark hair I had wanted to touch since the moment I walked into his office. The jasmine and cedarwood mingled in the small room, creating a scent that was entirely our own, a perfect blend of the fragile and the fierce. Nate pulled back just enough to look into my eyes. "I think," he murmured, his voice a rich, adoring rasp, "that I might want to acquire this taste for the rest of my life." I smiled, pulling him back down for another kiss. "Efficiency, Mr. Sterling. I think that's a very efficient plan." Outside, the snow continued to fall on New York, but inside the tower, the ice had finally melted. The enigma was no longer a myth, and the Omega was no longer a ghost. They were just 2 people, drinking terrible coffee, finally breathing in the same air. And it was, without a doubt, the most perfect thing in Manhattan,